Good morning. Welcome back to AC Podcast. We are starting a ladies section. And for our first guest, we have Sister Marsha Haldorsen. And she is a mom of four. And I wanted her to share her journey with us. So if you would go ahead and tell us a little bit of background with when it comes to motherhood.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I was a little bit older when I got married. I was 28 years old, and it wasn't too long before we wanted to start having children. And Nothing happened right away. And A couple years into it, I was a little discouraged. As someone who wanted to have children, and we did, the doctor things and all that, and we uh, finally got pregnant. The Thanksgiving of 2000, I think, and right after Christmas, I lost that baby, and that was talk about being discouraged here.
Right.
You wait for a couple years, and then you feel like that promise has been given to you, and then all of a sudden it's gone. But we kept on and kept on believing. And That spring, I got pregnant with our first child, Eustace. And
Awesome.
So I was 31 when I had him, and God kept blessing. And we 16 months after Eustace was born, our first daughter, Callan, was born. And then a couple years later, we had Barrett. And then 3 years later, we had Joran. So God has really blessed us, and we're very fortunate to be trusted with
Hmm.
4 children from God. So
And they are great kids. I love the Haldorsen kids. Something this podcast will kind of be interview type because I want to get I know what you'll have to say will minister to me and many others, but what were some of your biggest surprises or challenges early on in motherhood?
yeah, I tried to think of the surprises. I couldn't remember the surprises so much, but definitely there were challenges.
Hmm.
Um, Motherhood is not for the weak. It's a big job, and even though we love being a mother. That's our highest calling, I
Hmm.
think, raising a godly generation. It doesn't come without its challenges. I think just the challenges of it's the everyday things. It's
Yeah.
the keeping up with the home. That's a big
Laundry.
challenge. Laundry. When our kids were your kids' ages, I felt like just keeping up with the laundry and the clothing and always outgrowing things. I
Yes.
mean, that in itself was a full-time job.
Yes.
But then when you work outside the home, which I always have, I think just keeping up with things,
Hmm.
and then of course church, because you don't want to back down, from ministry opportunities, just from being in church. I mean, it's important um, to keep those things at the forefront. And so that's the challenges to me were just trying to stay on top of things, just to be honest.
I understand.
Yes, you do. You have 4 children
Yes.
too,
Yes.
and they're all young.
Yes. What ministries were you guys involved with? I know you're involved
hmm
a lot now, but
hmm
when you had the young kids, what were you doing?
So I've always been involved in the music ministry, and so that's a every week ministry, and so it's constant. A lot of things with that. Obviously, preparing for services, playing for services, special events like our dramas, or special music, conferences. We've done things like our new musicians program,
Hmm.
where trying to develop people,
Right.
and so that's always been my primary ministry that I've been involved in. Um, Different times I was involved with marketing activities,
Right.
trying to just do things to help in that area, in the church. Those are probably primarily the ones that I was involved in.
And how did you include your kids and all that? How'd you make it work for you guys?
Well, this is I feel very strongly about a couple things. Number one, and it's like I said, it's a challenge, but as a mother or a father, it's important to not withdraw from ministry when you have children. Now, having children, raising children, that is a ministry in itself. But it's important that they see you be
Mm-hmm.
involved in church, in the ministries of the church. Um, and so, you know, honestly, one of the ways we did that, because my husband Kurt has always been involved in different ministries, whether it's the sound or just construction projects
Right.
that are around the church. We've both been very involved, and so one of the ways that we've been able to do that is honestly just bringing them with us. And that's another thing I feel strongly about is that that's one. Number one, it's important for them. It's important for your children to see you involved in the work of the church and the work of God. But when you bring them with you, and that's not always easy,
Right.
but they start to, they see that they start to develop a love for that, and I think that that's really been one of the primary ways that they're involved now. They all have a desire, and that just because they grew up that way, not knowing any other alternative,
Right.
and when they were little, obviously they weren't really helping.
Right.
They were just here, um, and and everybody that was here was always good to, watch out for them,
Yes.
include them. I love it. Even when we're preparing for a service, I think sometimes parents get too nervous about their
Yes.
kids being on the platform, or sometimes they'll come up and look at the music. It doesn't bother me at all. That's the way I grew up.
Right.
My mom played the piano, and I grew up sitting underneath the piano during choir practices, and
I think it breeds a good curiosity for that
yes.
kind of
So,
stuff.
yes, I agree. And it doesn't bother me at all for those things. But, everybody was good, but to my kids, and to other kids. But I think that's the way you do it is that you bring them with you.
Yes. I think it's so important for you to feel like you have a village in the church, and um, people that you're singing with, their kids might be older than yours, but they can help you and be
Yes.
a good influence, and letting them. I think you, in today's world, I think it's balance. I think balance is very important. You want to be careful who your kids are around,
Right.
but I mean, I think I loved running around with the older crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
there were a lot of people that were good to me, and I want that for my kids.
Mhm.
You know, Leo, my oldest, he's 5, and he loves that 7, 8, 9 year old age
Mhm.
range. He loves that older um, conversation. And when we come here, he loves playing with Jameson Center. He's here a lot, and
Yes.
Everly Henson. He likes being around them. Hensley, they're a little bit older than him, and he loves that. And um, I remember coming to practices with my mom, and
Mhm.
there being little kids there and playing with them. And I
Yeah,
think it's so important because they get that social interaction, they get
absolutely.
the exposure. I think it breeds some spiritual maturity too. It starts
Mhm.
getting in them at such a young age. So I think it's awesome.
Absolutely.
Um, how did your relationship with God shape the way you parented through different seasons?
I think um your relationship with God and walking with God is largely a matter of trust.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that having already having a relationship where you have had to trust God, maybe that was a benefit of being a little bit older, when I became a mom, that I'd already had to go through some things,
Mm-hmm.
and walk through some things, and know and put it in God's hands, those situations. And you have that relationship with God, um, largely based on trust and other things as well, obviously. But I think that was probably the biggest thing because uh, as mothers, we don't always know that sometimes we don't feel up to the task,
Hmm.
and we may feel like I'm not sure I can handle all this,
Right.
especially with young children. It's so taxing, and um, if you don't, as you say, which I feel strongly about, if you don't allow or have that village around you, you can quickly get into a situation where you don't feel like you're enough. And but one of the things, and I know one of your questions was about verses that I kept in mind.
Hmm.
And so, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. You as a mother, you want all the things for your
Yes.
children, right? You want them to have the life, a good life. Obviously there's material things, and yeah, you want those things too, but
Right.
you want them to grow up loving God
Hmm.
and serving God. And so it's you can wonder at times if you're doing it right.
Yeah.
And I think that you have to trust that if you put God first, that and the work of the kingdom, if you put those things first, that he's going to take care of you and your children. And so I think that that's how my relationship with God influenced and helped me, I guess, in the
Hmm.
early days of motherhood, and even now. There's you know when they get to the point where they're driving
Yes.
or they're making life decisions,
Yeah.
uh, you just have to pray and hedge of protection around them
Yes.
and put them in God's hands.
Yes. I feel like in my own life, I feel like motherhood has anchored me even more to God
Mm.
because the most important thing for me is that my kids make it to heaven.
Yes.
And um, it's changed my walk with God just because I mean every day it's just praying that God's hand is on them and that they're protected and safe. But
Hmm.
um, I also trust God with them, and I've given them back to Him too. I have
Right.
to not worry so much because these are His kids that He's trusted me with, and He loves them more than I love them. So
Yeah.
that's something.
And it's obviously motherhood is a huge responsibility. Um, but that's a good thing that we're not just watching out for ourselves. That in some ways, in a lot of ways, my kids have made me a better person.
Hmm.
Um, Not that I was, doing things wrong or things like that, but it makes you kind of watch every step that you're taking, and every decision you're making because you know that they will impact um, the decisions you make today will impact your kids' future. And I've seen seen lots of situations where uh, that doesn't always turn out great, and so you realize the responsibility that you have, and not just big decisions, but just little things that you do every day. You realize that you have little eyes watching you,
Hmm.
and that makes you maybe take things a little more seriously and think about things in a godly way.
Right. Um, what role did prayer play in your life during your motherhood journey that's still going on, but in the early days?
Yes. I had to think about this because gosh, looking back, I Eustace is 23, so at the beginning, I think back that long ago, and I probably could have had a more consistent and stronger prayer life. I mean, don't we all? But because really, when you're a young mother or when you have young children, um, it's you kind of feel like you're in survival mode,
Yeah.
right? And you don't have a lot of time for yourself and for the things that even if they are important. So I think that sometimes it was I remember times a lot of times where I was just, sitting in the recliner, the rocker,
Mhm.
and maybe feeling a little overwhelmed, tired, and just those are the times I remember praying, and not just about praying over my children, which I think that was important, just for, to pray over them, pray over their future, but praying that God would help me and strengthen me. And so and I think too, sometimes um there were those times, those more quiet times and alone times with God. But I think that it's important uh when mothers when they are in a service,
Mhm.
right, to um to not be distracted by the things. If your children are young enough to be in a classroom, let them go.
Yeah.
You need that time to be involved in a service. I know we don't want our children running around like
Right.
crazy people, but um, don't let yourself be ministered to in those
Yes.
services, and take that opportunity not to be thinking about all the things that you have to do or how challenging it was even to get there that
Mhm.
day, but put all those things aside and really use those times to connect with God and you know use that time to be encouraged and be strengthened.
How did you prioritize your marriage during the early years?
Well, I don't know that we were always role models. We both worked, and Kurt's always worked a lot, and so the times that it's a challenge to find the time, right? Even if it's it'd be great if we could say, yeah, we had a date night every week or something, but sometimes it's just it may just be I don't even know, going for a drive, taking a walk,
Mhm.
maybe going out to dinner. Those would be great. But I think the main ways that we're going to marriage retreat,
Mhm.
and the first one we went to after I became a mom, Eustace was about 2.5 months old,
Mhm.
and that was tough.
I think
We
Leo was only three, or
Yeah,
three and a
yeah,
half months.
because they're November babies, right?
Yeah.
So that was rough. I mean, emotionally, but you have to realize that the times that you're investing in your marriage, and making sure that you have a strong marriage, that's going to give them that grounding, give your children that um, safety, that feeling of safety, and they need to, that they need to see that, and so I think, yeah, we probably could have done a better job at prioritizing something like, oh yeah, we every week we did something. I can't say that we did always put that at the forefront, but we made it through.
Hmm. Yeah. For us, I remember our first year of marriage retreat, which we waited 5 years to have a kid, to start having children. And I was just saying how much I loved marriage retreat, and they're like, well, wait till you have kids, you'll love it even more. It's just nice to kind of unplug and be away with your spouse. And we've gone when it wasn't always easy. I'm not throwing this out there to shame anyone, but
Right.
I left Leo as a first time mom when he was born in December. I went in February. And then I went the weekend before I was induced with Louis.
Yeah.
And then I left Salem when he was in the throes of a severe egg allergy. And
Hmm.
it was very hard for me to leave him. And then I had Pippin in October, and she made the journey with us, but she stayed in a hotel room. I was trying to lighten the load for my mother-in-law with that one more so than just leaving her. But it is so important, and it is such a good recharge for us. And we don't get those weekly date nights. Usually, when we have a babysitter, it's because we're involved with something at the church.
Right.
But it's for us, it's the late nights. The kids are asleep. We
Mhm.
stay up just whispering in our bed, talking. Sometimes that's what
Yeah.
it looks like. And I think as long as you're making the effort and communicating, sometimes it's me and him texting while we're away from each other,
Yeah.
just that day to day communication. I think as long
Right.
as you're communicating,
Yeah.
and keeping God first.
And I think we, there were times. I think the other thing is if there were events where it was couples based, and
Mhm.
just uh, our mother-in-law's always been good. She lives in
Yes.
town, and so we she's always been good to keep them, and so we would try to take advantage of those opportunities and get together with other couples, and that those times are important too, to surround
Mhm.
yourself with
Fellowship.
fellowship, godly people, especially people who have kids the same age. There's
Mhm.
something very unifying about that.
Yes, and it's hard to think this far in the future, but I was talking with another mom, and I said, I want you to have influence in my kid's life, and
Yes,
our kids might get married one day.
yes,
I want them to, my future daughter-in-laws or my
absolutely,
son-in-law, I want them to say, Ripley was always good to me as a kid, and
yes,
I'm happy to be a part of her family. That's for me a big dream that, you
yes.
know.
Your nana, Sister Dowdy, always taught us that, and I mean, this was when I was a teenager and younger, about that if you're people will love you if you love their kids.
Mhm.
And I think that that's so true, and I see it around our church that I certainly was a benefactor of that.
Mhm.
That people who are good to my kids, there's they hold a special place in your heart,
Yes.
and I when I have the opportunities, I try to invest in kids, whether it's through new musicians or, helping out in a class. I don't get to do that very often, but just yeah, it's special. People who love your kids, they're special to you.
Yes, I agree with that. To kind of transition here, something I feel like my parents were good at. They parented Nixon and I a little different. I was oldest daughter and he
Hmm.
was the baby boy. How did you have one son and three girls.
Hmm.
So how did you parent differently?
Well, um, um, girls are you finally have a girl, so
Mm-hmm.
you'll learn this. But and my girls weren't bad by any means, but Eustace, he wasn't a very good baby. He was a challenge as a baby, but he was always a good kid.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mean, obviously there were challenges. He didn't do very well at potty training at first, for
It's a boy
example.
thing.
Yes, but he was always a good kid, and honestly, I give whatever allowed that to be. I give that and him a lot of credit because he set a good example for our
Mm-hmm.
girls, and they kind of wanted to follow after his, went his footsteps and his example. Girls are a little more dramatic, and I was always a tomboy growing up, and so I mean I never envisioned having three girls. I'm like, Lord, I don't do hair. I don't know what you're doing giving me
He
three
was stretching
girls.
you and growing you.
But yes. So I don't know how I think understanding your kids' personalities and each of their giftings. I uh, for example, Callan is very outgoing, and um, Barrett. Not that she's not outgoing, but she could be a little more. emotional. And I had to realize that, if I was having a bad day, that had more of an impact on Barrett than it did Callan. Callan could probably let it flow off their back.
Hmm.
So, maybe it was things like that. Just, I do think that it's important. We use the colors around
Yes.
here,
Yeah.
and I generally think that each of my kids are a different color.
Hmm.
We've got all four colors covered, and so that helped me actually to um, understand them and maybe parent them a little bit differently. But I don't know that we had, did it hugely differently,
Right. Right.
but I think just
Yeah.
understanding
We
them.
had same values, but I think I was very sensitive. Well, still am. But my dad, I think, took that into
Yeah.
account when he, would talk to me about things. And Nixon maybe could toughen up a little bit more than
Hmm.
I could. And so
Yeah.
there just was things that we did
Right.
differently. Nixon and my dad played sports together, and um, on a non-spiritual element, that was their thing. And then like for me, my dad, he would come pick me up for lunch and he'd go to my field trips with me. It
Yeah.
just was kind of different. But
I do think it's important, and I tried to obviously with four kids,
hmm,
right? It's a challenge. A lot of times you're all together, but I did look for those times when I could just be one on one with
yes.
them. The field trips,
Hmm.
I loved those because it was a time where, everybody was in their place, but maybe that day it was Callan's day, and I got to go on a field trip with her or Barrett or whoever. Um, and I loved the times when I could find, even if it was just for a couple hours, just the one-on-one time, and making each one of them feel valued and
Yes.
special. I think that's important, and I
I
loved
I
it.
felt like the cool kid when my dad was there. So, um, what advice would you give to a new mom feeling overwhelmed or like she's not enough?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that is so easy. And as I thought about this, you when my kids were little, social media wasn't a thing.
Hmm.
And I think it's very easy. Again, motherhood is so taxing, and and so it's easy to feel overwhelmed anyway.
Right.
But when you look at these quote unquote perfect worlds,
Yeah. Comparison.
yes, comparison is the thief of joy.
Hmm.
And so I would say number one, um, don't compare yourself. Don't look at these perfect pictures and perfect quote unquote perfect worlds and think that you don't measure up, because probably behind that is a lot of mess
Hmm.
or a lot of angst, or um, it's important to it's more important to set a good tone in your home than to have a perfectly kept home.
Hmm.
So I would say number one, don't compare yourself. God gave you these children or child, and don't try to measure up to for perfectness.
Perfection.
Perfection. Thank you. It's like that's not a word. So I think that's important. I think, and you alluded to it before, the village. I try to tell, when I have an opportunity to teach, and I've taught a little bit on different settings and on parenthood. I say to our young moms, let others help you. We have a church full of people.
Hmm.
Most everyone loves children, right?
Right.
And I said, people who are my age now, and my kids are mostly grown. We miss that time. So if you feel like there's a time when you're dealing, especially with a baby, or you can just hand off, you want to go pray with somebody, or you want to go pray yourself.
Hmm.
Don't feel um, like less, or uh, hand them off. There's a lot of women and
Mhm.
men. My husband loves the kids, right?
Mhm.
They love him, but let people help you. There, many years ago, I think it was a book that was written, and it was there was this thought of it takes a village to raise a child,
Mhm.
and there was I remember at the time there was some pushback on that. That well, no, the parent is the parent, and I understand the thought
Mhm.
process behind that. But I have to say that I feel like there's a lot of truth and I think that that is a benefit of being in church is that you have a whole village around you. People, I'm very much a believer in needing the multi generations of society of a church
Mhm.
as a smaller part of that. God put those people in your life for a reason. Let them help you. There were, I have these very vivid memories of examples of this. My children were all born around dinner theater or Easter drama or youth drama times, and I was involved in music. Um, I remember my most this is my my biggest example, and um, it was a challenge. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, but um, Barrett was born in March, right around the time of we were getting ready for our Easter drama that year. She was born on a Saturday, and the next Wednesday night, it was in a full dress rehearsal. I was on the drums, and I mean, I remember bringing her in her carrier, and basically just putting her there with a corral. And but they loved her, and
Mhm.
they just took care of her, and I had to get in the drum cage and play. But I wouldn't trade that for anything. I remember, when Eustace was a baby and we were in the fellowship hall having
Mhm.
church. I remember times when I would bring him in and sit him down with Sister Lorraine or Jerry, and they would just take care of him during church, and I would I would just have to trust that somebody was seeing to his needs and whatever.
Yeah.
But it does take a village, um, and not just in the church times, but outside of church. If you as a parent don't feel bad about reaching out to others or allowing others to help you, I've always been we probably all like the idea of being self-sufficient. We always want to be enough, but it's important to have that village around you, the people around you, and like you say, um, letting them influence your children. That's not a
Mhm.
bad thing. Obviously, we want to protect our children, and there's certain situations or people that might not be the best influence, but it's important for them to have a lot of people, I feel like, influence their lives, from old to young.
Mhm.
Children, just a little bit older than them. Those things are important. And so I think it's important that you allow that. So not comparing yourself, allowing people to help you. And then just thirdly, just seek ye first the kingdom.
Mhm.
I mean, that's you know, I think that that in itself is why God has blessed us. I think with children who love God, who love the work of God, love ministry, or and are involved in ministry.
Awesome. Um, what do you want your children to remember most about you as their mom?
Well, of course, I want them to remember that I love them.
Mhm.
That that primarily, um, I want them to. Remember that the things I've tried to teach them and instill in them, um, and I don't know much more. I mean, that's um, th- I don't know much more than that. I want them to remember that I love them and that the things that I poured into them and the priorities that I put in front of them, that those are the things um, that will keep them through life, and not to stray from those things.
That they can pass it down to the next generation.
Yes, and that those are the true things that are important in life. You know, we can spend a lot of time trying to achieve and attain a lot of things, and most of those things don't mean a whole lot.
Hmm.
But the investment, the relationship with you have that you have with God, the relationship you have with others, and what you give of yourself to God, to ministry, to others. Um, you know, hopefully I've set a good example for them. Um, and I guess those are the things I want them to remember, because I want that to carry on, and you know, to their children, and to their children's children, and it's a generational thing. And so I don't, you know, as long as they know that I love them and that I try to set a good example for them, and teach them and show them what their priorities should be in life. Those are the things I want them to remember.
I think they will. You're an awesome mom. Um, Last thing, if you could go back in time and whisper something to your younger self as a new mom, what would you tell yourself?
Mhm. Well, of course, a lot of the things that I've learned that we've talked about today.
Hmm.
Um, but I think that one word that has meant more to me as I've grown older, and you know, as you grow older, you'll realize that we all need a little grace,
Hmm.
right? Um, we're by far not perfect. Um, you know, we're trying to follow um, the example that Jesus gave us, right? And so it's grace is not an excuse to not try. I'm very much, you know, I always try to improve. My that's my kind of my a lot of my motivation is I always want to be better. I always want to be a better person,
Hmm.
you know, a better mom, a better whatever. And so it's always important that you're you know, following Christ's example. But I would say, if I could go back and whisper something, is to give yourself a little grace. Um, you know, motherhood is tough, and
And we can be very hard on ourselves.
yes, yes, and you know, the I think it's the army that has the slogan. I don't know if they use it anymore, but you know, the toughest job you'll ever love. And I'm like, I remember thinking, you know, when I was a mother your age, I'm like, no, that's motherhood. You know, I loved,
Hmm.
you know, you love being a mom, but it's tough, and there are going to be days that you're far from perfect. You know, there were days where I lost my cool.
Hmm.
I gave up, you know, felt like giving up at least. I guess I never gave up, obviously, but um, you know, in the verse that came to mind, I had to look up the verse because you know, as a musician, I a lot of times think in, you know, terms of songs come to my mind.
Hmm.
And so there's a song when I was younger, His strength is perfect when our strength is gone. But the verse says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. And, you know, there are a lot of times as a mom, and especially when you're acclimating to being a mom, a new mom, a young mom, that you feel very weak. And but there that's when God, you may not see it, but that's when God is working in you and through you and giving you the strength that you'll need. You may not feel like every day you have strength, or every day that you handle things perfectly, or every day that your children will look back and think that you love them, or that you were a great mom, or that, you know, there's days where the house is a mess or whatever. But if I could go back, I would tell myself, give yourself a little grace. And I think that's important in all stages of life.
Right.
Um, to, to to just give yourself a little grace. And yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your heart today. I know you ministered to me, and I know you'll
Mm.
minister to someone else out there.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes.